Choosing a tech stack for your next big project is a major determinant of its success in the long run. However, the developer experience is, without a doubt, very crucial to how you scale your application too. This is why this tech stack can help you build a scalable and modular web application without a lot of decision fatigue and manual labor during setup. Hey there everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Monster Joe, or if you're new, welcome to my channel. And right here I make tech and programming content, so any videos related to coding and web development and stuff like that. So as you can see in front of you, it might look just like a normal web application, a merge stack application, but actually this is using what is known as a T3 stack. So if you look inside the documentation, it says the T3 stack is a web development stack made by Theo, focused on simplicity, modularity, and full stack type safety. This is the guy Theo right here. And what that means, this full stack type safety thing, is that basically you're adding types not only to the client but also to the server using TRPC. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the core elements of this stack, the core three main technologies, are Next.js, TypeScript, and Tailwind. But you can use Chakra instead, which is exactly what I did. I decided to disregard Tailwind and just use Chakra, which is a React UI library, and it's very intuitive, simple to use. It's actually my current favorite right now. So yeah. Now the real benefit is in this TRPC. If you look right here, it says move fast and break nothing, end-to-end type safe API. So essentially building a REST API. So it's not a completely new HTTP protocol, but it sits on top of REST. But there are some minor differences right here. So basically you define these HTTP requests in what is known as procedures. So procedures are like flexible components of your backend. Can be anything from like get methods or whatever. Basically, there are two types of procedures. You have the query and you have the mutation. A query is similar to get request in a normal Express.js backend, but a mutation is more for like post requests, patch, delete, and stuff like that. Now let's go back to the documentation and just go to TRPC and scroll down right here. Every single procedure uses a React query under the hood. So this T3 stack, the way they set up TRPC is that they're wrapping it inside React queries. So what that means is that you can make these use these hooks right here, so that it will handle all of the query cache invalidation and reloading and stuff like that for you. So it's pretty cool. Now for the database, we're using something called Prisma. Now Prisma is a type-safe ORM, object relational mapper, that is used to map traditional SQL databases and queries into JavaScript objects to perform several database operations. So what that means is that you can bring in something like MySQL or Postgres, and instead of writing these SQL queries manually, instead of like having to write it as normal text, what you would do is bring in an ORM, and it converts all these SQL operations into JavaScript TypeScript objects to be used in your front end or back end or whatever that may be. Now, even though Prisma was designed for SQL databases first, you can also use something like MongoDB with Prisma, which is really cool and really nice. So yeah, I mean, if you're using Mongoose and you want a better ORM, this is much better, honestly, in my opinion. You'll see why. Now there's more to the stack, but let's just jump into the application right here. This is what I built. It's a recipes app. It's pretty simple. As you can see, you have two sections. You have your recipes and the community recipes. These are recipes from like database. Every single recipe created by different users, and then your recipes, which is like the recipes that the user created essentially. So yeah, just right here. But that means also that the recipes right here, your recipes might still be in this community. Just like to point it out. Now, in order to create or delete a recipe, you need to be logged in with Google. So if you click login and then sign in with Google, click here and just give it a few seconds for it to load. Now, basically I already set up signed in Google, logged in, so now I get this Google wants your thing pop up. But as you can see, once you're logged in, you can see all your recipes right here. You can actually delete one if you want to. You can create a new one. But right here, if we click on view recipe, for example, you get extra information. And again, these images are like placeholders. You can put whatever you want in it. Instead, I'll have the link to the GitHub repository as well as this final website in the video description, so you can take a look at that for yourself, as well as other resources and links that might be useful for building this kind of applications. Now let's try creating a new recipe right here. So title, I don't know, omelets. Now these following fields, ingredients, instructions, tags, they're stored in an array. So now I had to like make some sort of like a workaround for this, and it's not the most ideal, especially when you're uh, when you're uh, when you're making this create inside of a modal instead of a separate page. But yeah, I mean, not the best user experience, but this is what I thought of at the time anyway. Now ingredients, you can see they're separated by commas. You want to add an ingredient, so let's see. Now for the instructions, we can crack eggs, and once you're done, you click create. Oh, and it'll refresh the page, and momentarily we should see the recipes. There you go. You have omelets, yummy fried. If you go view recipes, see all of that. It's just gibberish, but you get the point basically. You can also delete the recipe, so delete. You can see we can it was supposed to be the omelets right here was supposed to show you where it is in database, but after you delete it, it's gone. So yeah, there you go. Okay, but I created this one pan bread, and if we go back here, it exists in the database, so one pan bread, yada yada, and stuff like that. Now I'm going to go back to VS Code and show you how all these pieces work together and stuff like that. So let's go. All right, if you look on the right side, on the left side, this is the folder structure. Basically, I have three main folders: Prisma, Public, and Source. And inside this Source folder, this is where all of our magic happens. So this is where you set up pages, APIs, API routers, and stuff like that. Now inside this Prisma right here, if you go ahead and select schema.prisma, this is the file where you have a provider and stuff like that. This is where you select whatever database you're using. So in this case, it's MongoDB. And then you assign the environment variables, so database, URL. And we're going to take a look at how to set up everything right now. And then this is where you put all your models, all your tables essentially. So every recipe has an ID, title, stuff like that, author ID, and every recipe is linked to an author. And then I have this on delete, which is cascade. So essentially when you delete like an author, it's gonna delete all the recipes linked to that author. So kind of makes sense when you're building a full stack application. So, and then you have like account, provider, private token. This is next auth. Basically, this is what happens when you set up a T3 app. If you select next auth from the CLI, it creates these models for you. So sessions, and then user. These are all generated by next auth. This recipe is hard coded. So I coded this model. So yeah, I mean, it's CLI is very intuitive in many different ways. Now back inside Explorer, you can see public. It's nothing. This is just all the assets and images and stuff like that. Go to the SRC. You have like I created 5 folders, or basically some of them were created by the CLI. So components, they're self-explanatory. They're just folders for all the React components that I need. And then the layouts, this is just a global layout for all the routes in this application. It's just global styling stuff. And if we go to pages, this is where the bulk of our work takes place. So inside this API folder, you have 2 more folders. So you have the auth route, and then this slug right here, this dynamic route. Essentially, what we're telling you is that every single route that is nested inside next auth, essentially apply these auth options right here. So if we open up auth options, which on the left hand side is inside the server folder. So this is the boilerplate that is generated with some modifications, of course, so that I could set it up with Google. By default, it gives you Discord provider, so it's Discord provider instead, but you can get rid of it and add whatever you want. GitHub, Google. Now the thing with NextAuth is that it uses magic link authentication, so it's a passwordless sign-in. Don't need to set up any password for that. But if you want like just an email, there's a lot that goes in setting up, so you have to SMTP and host and email host and stuff like that, which is it's a very different topic on its own. We're not going to get into it right now. And then it gives you like comments right here. This is the JS docs comment right here. It just gives you like tips and hints on how to set up everything. So yeah, Theo, he thought of everything. He's I mean, this is incredible. Like I said, now back in our pages folder. If you click on this TRPC, this is a /TRPC folder. So yeah, you don't have to worry about how everything's set up, because the T3 CLI automatically handles everything for you, provided that you selected the NextAuth and all the necessary necessary libraries using the setup page. But if you choose to set it up later, it will be very difficult to get it up and running, especially in a full stack MVC app right here. Now finally, this recipe. So it's a dynamic route, which has like an ID. So basically www.whatever.com or localhost /recipes / then the ID of the recipe the user clicks. So back here, if I click on this view recipe button, you get recipes and / the ID on top. This is what the dynamic route is used for. And inside this component, I basically made a use router call. So now for every single recipe page, I imported this use router hook, which is from Next.js, and then destructured the ID from the query params, so that I would be able to get the recipe using this ID and typecast it as a string, because if you get rid of it, it's going to complain, essentially saying argument of string array of strings and undefined is not assigned. So you have to make sure that it is a string and only a string. So this is a very handy feature. Type safety might be annoying at first, especially if you don't know what you're doing, especially as a beginner, but it's going to be very helpful in the long run. It's just very productive to work with. So basically passing any procedure parameters, any input params for the procedure inside this use query hook, which is baked into this recipe API using something called a context. Now, context in TRPC is essentially how are you going to structure every procedure. This is the structure of the procedure, the shape of the data for every single procedure you make. So whether it's a query, whether it's a mutation, stuff like that. So every procedure can have like an isAdmin, for example. So get by ID can have like a boolean for isAdmin or role as a string and stuff like that. So yeah, we get the ID of the recipe, and we add all the data for said recipe inside right here. We return it. So if the user clicked on the one pan bread, we get all the information for this specific recipe by its ID. So title on top, and then headings and stuff like that, and then servings. Notice we have a question mark. This is because for values that can be undefined, as we hover over it and the IntelliSense tells us this recipe is either a recipe type, and this is a type that the Prisma generates for us, and we can use it throughout our application. But in this case, we don't, or we will, but only like once or twice. So it can be recipe, null, or undefined. So this recipe wouldn't have any single value at all. So, and again, we use this ID for the ingredient. So basically, we like I mentioned earlier, we get the ID from the URL, this query parameter from the URL, and then we use it several places throughout our application. First to get the recipe, and then several times for the key right here. So like the ingredients are stored in an array, we map over them. The ingredients are stored in an array, so we loop over them and map them, and then we create a bullet list right here, bullet points, and every list item has a key, which is very essential. And yeah, you have the ingredient, and the same thing for the instructions, and then I did the same for the tags. And then you can see this join right here. Since it's an array, we join them by adding a comma and then another space right here. So essentially, camembert could be comma bread and vegetables. So yeah. Now let's go to the home page, index.tsx. And if you go right here, first we create a variable to get all of our recipes. So essentially what we're doing is basically making a call. It's a GET request. We're fetching all the recipes from the database. And then this use disclosure hook. This is for the modal that I showed you earlier. So let me scroll down here to, where is it? Yep, recipe modal. So we're passing is open on close. This is a custom component that I created. Click here, and it has several states. So title, description, servings, tags, and errors. Now this is now this error variable. Essentially, this is if you have any empty fields. So if we go back here, go back to the home page button. If we have any empty fields and we try to click create, it will highlight them as red unless you fill them out. So otherwise, if it's not empty, you can go ahead and add this data to the database, make the post request that we need. And then the onClose method, this is basically just to close out of the modal, exit out of the modal, and then afterwards refresh the window. So think about this mutate is with React, this is a hook, like I said, and you cannot use hooks inside functions that are inside the components. So is create a variable which basically destructures this mutate property from the used mutation hook. So it returns to us an object that can either mutate or return data and stuff like that. So I have APIs, recipes, create recipe. So this is and then use mutation. Then this mutate, we can pass in the object, and we need the title, description, servings, and stuff like that. And this is the JSX for the UI. And notice right here the set instructions. We're getting a string first, and then what we're saying is that we're putting it in an array by splitting this using a semicolon or a comma in this case, and then spreading all of these elements inside the empty array. And then for the handle create recipe, this is the method that I showed you earlier. This is what happens if you click on create recipe and stuff like that. Now let's take a look at other components. So delete, again, there's a delete button that I showed you earlier, which basically triggers a pop-up right here, which is the modal. It says, are you sure? And if the user clicks confirm, then they handle the delete essentially. Alright, this is the recipe card component. So this is the component for every single recipe that you see on the home page. And then again, I use the mutation hook, same I did with create, but this time for the sake of readability, I just added delete recipe. So I destructured this mutate property in the object as a different name. So we use delete recipe instead of like mutate, which makes the code more readable. It's not 100% necessary, but just like to point it out. And this is the JSX for the recipe card. So essentially this is what the card looks like after applying all this JSX. Again, I'll have the code, the GitHub code in the description, so you can go ahead and check it out. Now for this is user recipe. This is a Boolean value that I created on top right here that checks, hey, this is a Boolean value that checks, if the logged in user, basically if this recipe belongs to the user who's currently logged in right now. So if I created this recipe, then this icon can be visible to the end user. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to delete other community recipes, because these are recipes that other people created. We don't want to delete other people's posts. We're passing in the recipe inside this Boolean function, and we're saying if this recipe belongs to the user, then filter that out and get the recipe that belongs to them. So yeah, we defined it once more inside the and then this recipe card takes in the following parameters. So if we go back here, these are the parameters right here, including title, image, servings, description, and then the author ID, which is what we need to make sure this is a user recipe. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the front end. Now let's take a look at the backend code, and then I'll show you how to add environment variables in this T3 app, because the way it goes about it is very type safe. So it's like prioritizes type safety over form, I guess. So functionality over form, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, inside this folder, this is where you define all your backend codes. So this don't have to worry about auth and db. These are two files that are generated. I already showed you earlier what they are. There, the T3 CLI handles all this. But if you go to API, you have the root file, which this is where you define all your routes. So basically, if you have a route for recipes, you go ahead and do that. So you put an object, recipe. You import the recipe router, and then add it to a recipes property and stuff like that. And this TRPC, this is how you. It shows you exactly how it works under the hood, so you can feel free to read this in your own free time. It's like basically it documents everything right here. So context, it defines what context is and stuff like that. But anyway, if you go back to the routers, you have the recipe route. These are all the CRUD operations. I didn't add edit, and it's because like I didn't have time to record before I could record it. So yeah, you can feel free to add it if you want to. You can get a single recipe by ID. So this input right here, it specifies what input it should take, what object or whatever data it to input to this procedure. And then query, this is used to fetch the data. So essentially, query is a backend. Query is a callback function that returns another callback. So essentially, whatever database operations, so Prisma, recipe, find first. So this find first is basically we're telling it whatever like the first field that matches whatever we put inside this input right here. And the same for get by user ID. So we're getting according to the ID of the user instead of the ID of the recipe. And this include object right here. We're telling it basically to include this field in the data that gets returned from this single procedure. So this function, for example, user only returns some fields. You can also choose to include other fields inside the model, inside the table or collection in MongoDB. This is what they call a table. This is to get all recipes. Very simple, very straightforward. Now for this great recipe, use z.object. Now if you're wondering what these z's are, this is Zod essentially. It's basically a type validation for TypeScript, but it also works in JavaScript, but you're not going to be able to get the same benefits you do if you're using TypeScript. But essentially what you're doing is that you're validating that whatever data that is being provided to this object or whatever is, for example, a string. So if you input a string, if you input a number, you get an error, or if it expects an array and it is given a string instead, it will throw you an error. So again, it's type safety right here. He thought of everything. This create right here, we're giving all the data to store in our database. And then this connect right here, this is a property right here to basically get used for like nested data, nested objects. So this author object has an ID and a name, for example, name and ID. And finally have the delete recipe. Now for the environment variables, first off you define them like you normally would in the .env files. So first up you need database URL, and then this next auth secret, you're gonna have to download OpenSSL. I have to install this program on your computer if you're on Windows. But basically this is the secret key for the next auth library, because without it, your application will not work when you ship it to production. So you need to be aware of that. Now after you define the .env file, in the root of this src folder, you go ahead into the env.mjs. This is the file where you define all the types for env variables. So again, another type safety measure taken inside this application. So basically this next auth is z string. Now it's supposed to say have a ternary operator that says if it's in production, then make sure this is not an optional value, it's a required value. So validate that this is that this is a valid variable. And then you define the same for string, for the client ID and secret. And then you add a minimum 1. So this minimum 1 makes sure that this variable is not an empty string, essentially. And then finally, once you do that, you can add in the process env file. You basically assign a key value pair in this process env object, and basically whatever, like database URL, stuff like that. So basically client ID and then secret and stuff like that. You give it process.env and then the name of a variable. And one more thing about naming variables is that anything that is not supposed to be you get released in the public, you add an underscore secret to the end. Otherwise, you're gonna have to use next public for this environment. If it's anything that it's a public, so anything on the client side, you define it right here. This is for the server. If you want to define any client-side variables, you put them in this client object. Then you prefix it with the next public. And this is all it takes to create a T3 stack application. I'm sorry this is all over the place, but I'm trying to be as organized and concise as possible with this walkthrough and how I explain things. Now this is the final project on GitHub. This is the Vercel URL right here. If you click on it right here, this is the exact same as this one right here. This is what the final app should look like if you deploy to Vercel. And yeah, that is pretty much it for this video. This for me is honestly, it's a very great stack. It's a wonderful stack actually, and I think Theo did a pretty good job. He absolutely nailed it. Again, this was not meant as a full tutorial. It's just like a demo or a walkthrough. If you do want a tutorial eventually, I'm gonna go ahead and make a poll or whatever right here. If that's the thing and still a thing in YouTube, I haven't done it for a long time. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my content. And see you next time.